Podcast Answer Man, episode number 230.
Entertaining, educational, and encouraging content that makes a difference.
This is GSPN.TV.
Join the community.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Podcast Answer Man. My name is Cliff Ravenscraft, and this is the podcast about podcasting, helping you take your show to the next level. It doesn't matter if you're a brand new podcaster, if you've been podcasting for many years, or you haven't quite yet recorded that first episode. There's something that we can all do to take our show to the next level. That's right, my friends, and one of the things I'm going to be doing here is taking my own show to the next level, and that is getting back to a weekly release schedule of this podcast. In fact, it's so important to me that I've decided that since I released my last episode on Monday, but my preferred release date for my episodes are Friday of each week, I didn't want to make you wait from last Monday all the way through to this Friday, making you wait, an entire, 12 days? That's just not going to happen. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and record 2 episodes this week. Going to go ahead and record and release this one here on Monday, October 17th, 2011. And hopefully I'm going to record episode 231 tonight and record that and then release that on Friday to get me back into my normal release schedule. Now, the problem is, though, I'm going to just be authentic and real with you and tell you that I'm on take 7 of this podcast episode. That's right, and this hardly ever happens to me. Have you ever had podcaster block? I don't have podcaster block. I know exactly what I want to share with you today. In fact, take 2 of this podcast, which take 2 is technically as take 1 because take 1 was just one little hiccup within the first couple seconds of the recording, and I stopped and stopped and re-recorded. But take number 2 was an hour in length. It was a completely formed podcast. It was 100% everything that I thought I wanted to share, except for the fact that I got around to the end of it, and I felt like I needed to wrap it up because I was running right up against my mastermind call on Mondays, and I at the end of it I felt like, well, you know what? I didn't actually get to say in summary what I wanted to say. And so I just dumped the entire episode and I said, you know what, I'm just going to re-record episode 230 because it's that important to me. What I have on my heart is this important to me. And by the way, real quickly here, no questions, no answers. Not this episode. This episode, in fact, will probably have almost no technical aspects or technical details of podcasting whatsoever. This is all going to be heart matter kind of stuff. And in fact, if that's all you care about, then just tune in to episode 231 or go back and listen to some episodes in the archives there. But this episode, number 230, is titled, Why Do I Do What I Do? I get interviewed a lot on other people's podcasts. They invite me to come on their show. They want me to talk about my journey, how I built an online business into what it is today, and how I've built a community and a loyal online following, how I'm using social media. Most of the time it's how can you come in and talk to my audience about how podcasting has benefited you, your journey into podcasting, and how you turned it into a business, and how other small businesses can benefit what they're doing by adding possibly benefit what they're doing with the podcast and things like that. And I love doing those interviews, and I do about 1 to 3 of those each and every week. And last week, I was interviewed by John Martin of the Small Business Roundtable podcast. And in that podcast interview, John asked me a question that does not get asked very often. You see, I get a lot of questions about how do I do things? Tell me how this happened. Tell me how that happened. Tell me, how do you pull this off? How are you able to keep in touch with these people? How do you build community? How do you incorporate this? And very seldom do I get the question that John Martin asked me in his interview. And he asked it, and to be honest with you, I'm surprised at how caught off guard I was. Is that, yeah, how off guard? Anyway, you get the idea. I was really caught off guard, and I was surprised at how much it did that to me, because I'm very familiar with why I do what I do. But he asked the question, why do you do what you do? And I had an answer. But at the same time, it's funny because I'd been asking myself that same exact question. In fact, you know what? I do want to give you a technical aspect of podcasting, if you will. It's not technology related. It's not the how do you set up and configure your website or plugin or thing or a technology tip or tool that's going to help you take your podcast to the next level. But it is something I think that is extremely important. It's something I think I can actually ask my good friend Dan Matson to help chime in on here. And you know what? This is going to sound like an advertisement for podcasting A to Z, and it's not. But I think it fits in. I think it does. This is something I was going to just throw up on my podcasting A to Z website as a testimonial. I'll eventually get around to doing that. But this is why I do what I do. And I had to think about this. Why did I leave my career in insurance? Why did I decide to create all these different podcasts? Why do I have so many podcasts? You know, people ask me all the time, they ask me the question, Cliff, how did you come about to creating so many podcasts? Or the bigger question is, how do you record so many episodes in a single week? How on earth do you produce 7 to 15 episodes in any given week? And not, the question doesn't come up as, why do you do that? Why do you do that? And I have to sometimes ask myself that question. And the reason why is because if I don't keep my mind set on why I'm doing the things that I do, then I can experience burnout. I don't know about you guys. Have you ever experienced burnout before? I have. It doesn't happen very often. It doesn't nearly happen nearly as often as it used to before I started doing what I love for a living. But before, it happened a lot before I did that. But I experienced burnout it was probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago. It wasn't because I was sick or ill. This is different than what happened to me back in December when I was very, very ill from, what was that? Strep throat and some other things that just knocked me out. I wasn't able to even get out of bed for 2 weeks, let alone, do any work or anything. No, this isn't that. This was literally burnout. I actually got so involved with my podcasting course, the tutorial on Learn How to Podcast, that I spent more than 50 hours in a single week putting together the learnhowtopodcast.com tutorial that I have out there for free. And it basically, not only did I spend 50 hours on creating that product, that tutorial, but on top of that 50 hours, I also recorded 7 to 15 podcast episodes that same week. Not only did I do that, but I also handled all the most important emails that came in during that week. I dealt with the fact that I was looking for a new assistant that week. My assistant was supposed to be with me that week. It was supposed to be her last week, but she had an emergency C-section, and so I lost my assistant at the beginning of that week. And it was just crazy. And not to mention the fact that I had some consulting calls on top of that. So it was the craziest week of my life. I probably worked a total of about 90 to 100 hours, and I burned out. In fact, if you want to hear the result of that, I would encourage you to go to gspn.tv/that episode. gspn.tv/that episode. And I thought that I was just at the edge of burnout, and it became evident during that episode of Family from the Heart with my wife and I. It became very evident that I was officially burned out. I had a meltdown right as we were recording. I think it was episode 175 of Family from the Heart. Let me just look real quick here. By the way, if you go to podcastanswerman.com and look at episode number 230, you're going to see links to all of the things that I mentioned here. And I actually have them all in front of me because like I said, I had recorded this entire episode once before. So episode 175 of Family from the Heart was titled That Episode. And if you want to hear me actually completely lose it in a podcast, there you go. Episode 175. It's basically gspn.tv/that episode. All right. So there you go. So yeah, I had basically worked way too much, and I was just overwhelmed by it all. And I needed to take a break. And that, to be honest with you, I didn't take a break, if you will, but I decided, you know what, I need to step back for just a little bit. I need to give myself some time to recover and recuperate, to rest and to relax. And so I did that as much as I could. I still kept up a lot of my commitments, but I wasn't able to keep up with everything. And one of the things that didn't happen was recording, episode number 229 of Podcast Answer Man for a couple weeks. And I got out of my routine there. It's not because I lost my passion for what I do. It's just I was simply burned out. And then all of a sudden it became quite evident with, like I said, gspn.tv/that episode. But you know what? Why did I burn out? And I believe it has everything to do with the fact that it took me a little bit to answer John's question. And that is that I had lost sight for just a short period of time. I had lost sight of why do I do what I do? Because there was a reason I created the Learn How to Podcast tutorial. There was a reason I worked that hard on that project. There was a reason why I have, that I went ahead and produced all the podcast episodes that week. But anyway, the day that episode of Family from the Heart happened, the rest of that day, all of the episodes following that, I recorded them all, but I was mentally not there. In fact, my co-host on all of those shows that followed that episode, the co-host pretty much carried the show. I was just barely checking in. In fact, we have this one show. It's called Life, Love, and the Movies. And my co-host, Tracy Trost, was sharing this very inspirational story. And typically we go, we jump off of one another's comments. We use, one person will say something and I'll hear what Tracy says and I'll use it as a springboard. And I remember that day, it was the last podcast of the day, and I told him, I said, listen, I'm totally not here today. And in fact, if you want to just cancel today, we can. He says, no, let's do this thing. And I'm like, great. And so he says something, and then all of a sudden in the podcast, I say, that's cool. And he says, that's cool. So that's all you got, huh? And I'm like, dude, I totally did not hear what you just said. I'm just going to be honest with you. I did not hear what you said. And that's how I felt that day. And what happened was I had gotten so bogged down by so many different things. And if it was just the podcasting, if it was just producing the podcast, if it was just dealing with, the fact that that I didn't have my assistant anymore and that I needed to find somebody to replace my assistant, and I was doing all the work that she had been doing for me. If it was just the project of learnhowtopodcast.com, if it was just any one of these given things, but it was the culmination of all of those things building up that really caused me to ask myself, why am I doing all of this stuff? And then all of a sudden, now that I've stepped back and I've taken some time off, I'm saying to myself, man, why am I doing what I'm doing? And do I need to do less? That's a question. Do I need to do less? And today, this afternoon, I was out with Stephanie, my wife, and we were at we have a business meeting every Monday. We go together and have lunch and talk about our goals for the business here. And I was just like, I just wonder, what all should I be doing? And sometimes I feel like I'm drawn in so many different ways. Sometimes I feel like I should be pursuing the content. In fact, many times I've told people in a podcast that says, my real dream, my ultimate goal is to find some way to make a full-time living just from producing the content, because that's where my heart is. And, I have these people who I surround myself with, that I have these trusted advisors, and they know who they are. And when they hear something like that in a podcast, they give me some valuable input, some valuable advice. And I hear it and they say, if you were to try to maybe, here's some things to consider. And I love that they approach things. They don't ever say, this is what you should do. But they always say things like, this is some things that you can consider. And I had this one friend of mine, his name is Stuart. He says, you could try this. You could try to implement this. And that would get you closer to that place where, really you could spend all of your time focusing on just producing the content. And that's where that's where your true heart and your passion is. And then all of a sudden, it's like when I said that, I really felt that. But then all of a sudden, it's been a couple days since I actually said that, since it was in a podcast and since it was recorded and released and delivered. And then all of a sudden, it's been a couple days since Stuart had heard it and took the time to to write this email and send it to me. And then all of a sudden, I read this email. And when he says, and besides, we know that your passion is to maybe do less one-on-one consulting or less of these A to Z classes, and maybe you can build up some of that passive income or recurring income and maybe do this business model and try implementing this so that you'll do less of this one-on-one consulting and less of this, because we know your heart is and your passion, as you said, is just in producing the content. And when I heard it back, it's like, you know what? I remember saying that, and I remember believing that when I said it. But now when I think about the prospect of not having one-on-one consulting calls and coaching calls, or not be doing my group training or teaching people how to podcast, all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know. I really feel led in this area, and so my question is, do I drop one and focus on the other? I mean, because that's sometimes what I tell people to do. And oftentimes, if these things are completely unrelated, I would say definitely you need to find out where you want your focus to be. Otherwise, you're divided amongst yourself, and you're not going to be able to be successful in any one thing. And so, am I a consultant / coach, or am I a producer? And it's not that easy right now for me, because I find that I'm called in both areas. I feel I want to, I derive a great sense, derive, is that the right word? Anyway, I gain a great sense of fulfillment from both producing podcast content and also from teaching others how to podcast and to find their voice, to successfully find out what it is within them that they have to offer to the world that would help make people's lives better. The question is, why do I do what I do? Because I believe what I do it is making a positive difference in people's lives. That's what I love about podcasting. That's what I love about it. I have been positively influenced by many people. All right. In fact, here's what I want you to do. I want you to check out two different links. These, again, will be in the show notes. All right. The first note is 48days.com/listen. 48days.com/listen. This is the podcast for Dan Miller of 48 Days to the Work You Love and No More Mondays. And I'm very proud to say that Dan Miller is a good, close, personal friend of mine, and the whole story of how he became so is just an amazing journey all within itself. But the thing is this is a podcast that before I ever knew Dan personally, I had listened to his podcast, and it was having a positive influence in changing my mindset, changing the perspective of how I looked at work in a very huge way. And it took a lot of listening to really gain a bigger picture of what Dan was trying to say, and it's completely changed my perspective on life and even my worldview in a lot of ways. And I'm so excited. I mean this. I'm very excited. And here's the other link that I want you to go to. This is gspn.tv/know thyself. All right, all one word, gspn.tv/know thyself. It'll be linked in the podcast show notes over at podcastanswerman.com/y, by the way. That's going to be the short URL for this episode. If you just go to podcastanswerman.com/y, it'll take you to the show notes of this episode. Anyway, Dan's on vacation this past week, or he's out traveling, I should say, anyway. And on Wednesday, October 12th, he had me release a special episode of his podcast called Know Thyself. And Dan's podcast is much like mine. He takes in people's questions and he answers them. Only instead of that being about podcasting, he does his questions and his answers are all related to finding the work that you love and finding ways to become profitable doing what you love for a living. And as you can tell, that you hear a lot of that from me. And I learned a lot of that from Dan Miller and several other people. But Dan Miller's podcast has had such a profound influence on my life. And I'll tell you what, he sums up everything with one single episode called Know Thyself. And again, if you go to gspn.tv/know thyself, I encourage you to listen to that episode. It's not like his normal episode, just like this episode here is not like my normal episode for Podcast Answer Man. It's a little bit unique. It's a little different. It's me taking some time to share what's on my heart and to share why do I do what I do. And so anyway, that's Dan Miller. So the question is, why do I love podcasting so much? Is it because it can make me lots of money? No. In fact, when I first left my career in insurance, there was no promise of a lot of money. There was no promise of any money. I didn't have a clue how I was going to make money. So why did I leave? Because I felt called to do it. Not that I'm called to podcast. I know what my calling is. My calling, and I found it through podcasting, by the way. But I found my true calling. I know that I am called to be a source of entertainment for others. I am called to educate others or to teach people what I have learned. I'm called to teach, and I think that I've been given a gift to teach people in a unique way that helps me reach a lot of different people. So I've been called to entertain, to educate, to encourage others, and to inspire others. And I found that podcasting was just the perfect way for me to achieve that purpose in my life with a large number of people. And I've been able to successfully do that week after week. And so that's why I love podcasting, is because it allows me to entertain, to educate, to encourage, and to inspire. And you know what? That's what podcasting has been for me. Folks like Dan Miller, Father Roderick, and the Nutrition Diva, and oh goodness, I can't remember his name right now. Anyway, oh goodness, Father Roderick would know, but we talk about him all the time. Dr. Monty, that's it, Dr. Monty from fitnessrocks.org. I mean, that guy and his podcast had such a profound effect on me that I've lost 50 pounds as a result of his podcast. And Dave Ramsey, his podcast, back when, I started subscribing to his radio show via the podcast because I found out about podcasting and I could listen to this stuff when I want, where I want, and how I want, and what I want. I just love it. And so these shows became what really helped shaped me into who I am today. Before, I would have had to read podcasts or read books by these people. I would have had to maybe catch them on the radio, or perhaps, attend some college courses or something like that to learn the kind of information. But through podcasting, my life was drastically changed by listening to these people on a weekly basis. And today I am who I am as a result of a lot of valuable information that has been shared freely with me from people who have produced podcasts. And that's why I love podcasts so much. And here's the other thing. I really believe that it's important for us to know why we want to podcast. Because, it's one thing to say, okay, podcasting is really cool. All right. Podcasting is so much fun. There's so much potential. And okay, I'm kind of geeky and I would love to podcast. But the question is, okay, what do I podcast about? Do you know this is something that has happened to me over and over again as a consultant and coach? People will come to me and say, Cliff, I'm ready to start podcasting. In fact, I want to go ahead and buy your most expensive equipment package, and I want to get that delivered, and I want to go ahead and schedule, the 4 or 5 2-hour sessions with you one-on-one, and I want you to teach me everything I need to launch my podcast. And in fact, I want to spend, the first session talking about, okay, what should I podcast about? And that blows my mind. The folks don't even know yet what they want to podcast. They've already made a decision that they want to create their website. But they don't even know what URL to get. I mean, they're stuck. It's like I can't even get my website online because I can't even decide what domain I want. And it's not finding a domain that fits my niche topic. It's the fact that I have no niche topic. I have no idea what I want to podcast. I just want to podcast. And this prompted me to create a audio tutorial that is available only to my Podcasting A to Z clients right now. But it's what I start them off with when they start my A to Z class. I have them listen to this very first tutorial called "Before You Record Your First Episode," and I want to play a piece of audio feedback from Dan Matson. And Dan, by the way, this is 5 minutes in length. I think it fits in perfect here because while it is a testimonial for my Podcasting A to Z course, which, by the way, if you haven't yet decided to launch that first episode yet, I would love to invite you to my November A to Z course. It starts on November 2nd. It's going to be great. I hope that I'm able to fill the class out. Currently, I have one person signed up. I haven't yet sent out an email to my mailing list letting them know that I'm doing this. I think I sent out a couple tweets. So I'm going to be sending out an email here shortly. If you want to sign up for my Podcasting A to Z course, I would love for you to do that. It's coming up here November 2nd, Podcasting A to Z. Just use promo code PAM in the shopping cart to get $99 off. That is if you are actually signed up for my mailing list. If you're not signed up on my mailing list, go over to the website, get onto the mailing list, and then use promo code PAM, and you'll get $99 off. But anyway, listen to Dan, because this right here, I know why I create the podcast content, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. But why do I do what I do with my clients? Why do I get such a sense of fulfillment out of it? I think if you hear Dan's words here, this is Dan Matson, you're going to get a little bit of feel of the kind of feedback that I get. And this is why I love, and Dan's just one person that I've helped realize a true joy and helped uncover a passion for a niche topic that all of a sudden it's like, wow, I see some great potential here. Let me play this from Dan, and I think you'll get a feel for what I'm talking about.
Hey, Cliff. Dan Matson here from hookedonwoodenboats.com. It is Sunday, October 9th, and I just finished your Podcasting A to Z class a couple days ago. And as you know, at the end of that class, I sent you a message that said, Cliff, if you'd like a testimonial from me, I'd be glad to give it because I really enjoyed the course. And so you said you would like that. And so I'm just saying that so folks know this is an unsolicited testimonial. Anyway, so I started the course 4 weeks ago and started from ground zero, had no website, no podcast. I've dreamt about podcasting for probably a year now. And so one of the first assignments was, or one of the things Cliff pointed out initially, was that the biggest mistake people make is they get all excited about podcasting, and so they go buy equipment and they start recording and they start a podcast, but they really don't think through what their purpose is, why they want to podcast, who their audience is, are they passionate about their topic, those kind of things. And so Cliff encouraged us to sit down and figure all that stuff out. So I thought, I really need to do that. I had a couple ideas in mind that I was pretty sure I was going to go with. So I wrote some stuff down and I submitted it to the online site where Cliff would review it. And I said, Cliff, here's a couple things I'm looking at doing. One is a personal finance podcast, and the other one is a small business podcast. And those are things that I've done for a lot of time, and I know a lot about them. And so I kind of gave all the details. And lo and behold, I get a message back from Cliff, and Cliff says, Dan, I don't see a lot of passion in these topics. And, I don't hear passion in the tone of how you're writing this. And so I thought, by golly, this guy's got like a sixth sense or something, because I'm not super passionate about those things. They're things that I've done for work for the last quite a few years, and but it's not like I get up on Monday morning and say, man, I can't wait to go in and, balance the trial balance or prepare the financial statements or whatever it is. So I got my wheels a spinning, and I got to thinking, really I'm more passionate about wooden boats and also about bicycling, because I love to bicycle. So anyway, I started this dialogue with Cliff, and by the end of that, probably the second day of the class, through Cliff's direction and input and from other people from the class, decided to go with a podcast about wooden boats, because I love wooden boats. I could spend every day working on wooden boats. I can talk about them all the time. It's been a hobby of mine, and I think they're really cool. And so that's what I'm going to do. So anyway, that was the first really cool thing that happened, is, Cliff really got inside my head and helped me figure out what was going to work for me. Anyway, the course was phenomenal. Within 10 days of starting the class, I had my website up, looking pretty good, and my first podcast recorded and on my website, and within a couple days after that, had it in the iTunes directory and the Zune directory. And the course is super thorough. I think, I hate to admit it, but I had the most questions online in the class. I think I had 160 conversations back and forth with Cliff. He was right there to answer every single question I had. It was phenomenal. And, Cliff's a very patient guy, because if I was teaching about the 20th or 30th time I was asked the same question, I would probably get a little impatient and say, well, that's in your coursework on this page or in this spot in the video. But Cliff's not like that at all. He's just very encouraging, very supporting. The guy knows his stuff inside and out. I just feel like I avoided so many mistakes, and I got this thing up and running, and now I've got 3 podcasts online, and I'm fine-tuning my website, starting to do some interviews with some folks. I've got real basic equipment to start with, but I figured out how to make the best use of it because of Cliff's help there. So anyway, Cliff, just wanted to say thanks. I highly recommend the class. If you want to get started in podcasting, go for it. Just sign up for this thing, and you're going to have to put some time into it, but Cliff is there to guide you all the way, answer your questions, give you encouragement and support, and help you make it happen. So anyway, thanks again, Cliff. I really appreciate it. Dan at hookedonwoodenboats.com. Over and out. Talk to you later.
All right, there you go, my friends. There are a couple things. Now, I know that sounds, it's a testimonial for Podcasting A to Z. And yes, go to podcastingatoz.com. Please do me a favor, sign up for my course and use promo code PAM in the shopping cart, $99 off. Okay, got that out of the way. But here's the thing. I love this. This is, and I've seen this happen so many different times. I've got somebody who comes into the class and he's like, I know I want to start a podcast. I've been wanting to start a podcast for a very long time. And okay, I have 2 ideas. One is that I could do a personal finance podcast. All right. Or the other idea is that I could do a small business tips and tips and let me give you some small business ideas and small, ways to help you in your small business. And so the other thing is he said, it would be cool if I could find a way that eventually that this podcast will help lead to an additional income stream down the road. So I knew that this was a part of his motivational factor as well. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But he was listing out all the reasons why he chose these these 2 topics as far as what his podcast would be about, and listing them all out. He gave the qualifications, and let me tell you, I hear these qualifications a lot. This is what I've always done. That I've spent the last fill in the blank. I've spent the last X years of my life, number of years of my life, working on this topic. I have tons of experience. I've helped this here, and it's almost as though he was giving me a resume as to why he was qualified to do a podcast on this topic. And I'm like, okay, sounds to me like you're qualified. Of course, here's the thing. there is absolutely no qualification necessary for you to create a podcast about anything. I mean, I literally could start a podcast in 15 minutes about, going green, and I could start a podcast tonight about solar panels. I know nothing about solar panels. I have zero qualifications whatsoever about solar panels. But you know what? If I became passionate about solar panels and I was enthusiastic about learning more about solar panels, I could become a go-to expert in the field of solar panels. And you know what? There might be somebody else out there who has been dealing with solar panels, most of their lives. And to be honest with you, they got into it because they were in whatever the reason would be. They got into, but really they're into it because, well, it's how they pay the bills. And they really don't have any passion for solar panels. I mean, they know everything they need to know about solar panels, but man, and boy, you put a microphone in front of their face, they could talk and talk and talk about solar panels and all they know about solar panels. And sure, the information would be valuable and the content would be pretty decent. But if that person really hated solar panel, their career, and they were just doing, it's like, well, the next thing you need to know about solar panels is, well, yes, you could do this and you could do that. And if you have zero passion for it, that's going to come through. And so just being good at something isn't the reason why you should do it. This all goes back to this whole thing. Like I said, Dan Miller talked about know thyself. And the important thing is, it's like, okay, so this is who you are. This is what you've done. This is your qualifications. But is this what you want to do? I mean, Dan said it himself. It's like, do I wake up in the morning looking forward to going in and doing personal finance? No. Would I wake up in the morning and say, "Ooh, I get to help small businesses grow their small business"? Well, I mean, maybe helping people is going to be fun and stuff like that. But that even there, you could tell it's like, it's not necessarily where my passion lies. Gosh, if you're going to ask me about my passion, it's I guess I'd talk about boats or wooden boats or what was the other one? The other one was biking. And I'm like, dude, where'd this come from? It's like, okay, we go personal finance or small business podcast, and then all of a sudden wooden boats. And the funny thing is I'm gonna let you in on a little secret here. When I first read that, I get an email notification every time somebody posts a message into my A to Z course, and I pulled it up and I just looked at. I was away from my computer when that came in, and I just looked at it for just a moment. And I glanced and I'm reading this and I'm like, he says, I'm really into wooden boots. And I'm like, what? Wooden boots? Seriously? And so I'm not kidding you. I got, that was on my mind all afternoon. And I'm like, wooden boots? I mean, seriously, am I going to help somebody do a podcast about wooden boots? And it's hilarious. I literally, I'm doing Google search for wooden boots. I'm like, who makes wooden boots? I had never heard of wooden boots. And so I'm sitting there thinking, it's like, okay, maybe this is one of those topics that I don't know. Seriously, I guess. I mean, that's niche. That's a niche topic. There's no question. And you know what? If you're totally sold out and passionate about wooden boots, by golly, there's probably somebody else out there that loves wooden boots. And so I was sitting there getting ready to respond to his thoughts on biking or wooden boots, and I was going to steer him towards potentially biking, but he did list wooden boots first, so I was going to have that dialogue with him until I actually opened up my email client on my desktop and actually took a minute. It's like, oh, wooden boats, and I'm like, okay, and then I'm like, Who's into wooden boats? I mean, okay. And so I started doing some Google searching on wooden boats, and it's like, wow, there's a wooden boat association, there's wooden boat clubs, there's wooden boat this, there's wooden boat that. It's like, okay, now he's on to something. This right here, he could become a go-to person in the field of wooden boats. And so that's where he led. Now, let me tell you something. I've had 10, maybe 15 interactions with him since the course has ended. And he is on fire. He's like, man, I tell you what, I can't wait to start my day. And you heard it. He says, listen, I could work on wooden boats all the time. I could work on them every day. I could talk about them all day. What happened is this whole comes to that whole know thyself thing. It's like, wait a second, I have this deep passion within me. How can this be of value to people though? But that's the thing. If this passion is within you, the question is can you help people through wooden boats? I mean, I could see so many different things for potential here. Just being able to bring valuable information about preserving wooden boats, products to help you with wooden boats, training materials on how to do wooden boats. I mean, just so many different things. There are potential there. And he's tapped into that passion, and that passion is driving him. And that passion, I believe, is going to get him past episode number 7. That is what it takes. It takes that kind of passion. And so I'm looking forward to it. By the way, check him out, hookedonwoodenboats.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at twitter.com/woodenboatdan. All right, Wooden Boat Dan. But Hooked on Wooden Boats, that is an example of just one person. And I have lots of others that I've worked with one-on-one and in these A to Z classes where I get a sense of fulfillment in helping somebody uncover a passion. I mean, I don't know where this is. I don't know where Dan's journey is going to lead him. I don't know if he's going to have the determination to carry this on and to take it full blown into, this being his full-time career and 10 years from now or 7 years from now. I don't know. But here's what I do know is that there have been enough people who have worked with me either one-on-one or within a webinar or, within a podcasting A to Z class that have come to me months later or in the one-on-one consulting case years later and have said, you know what, I just quit my job and I'm now doing this full-time. And I'm like, they're writing me saying, thank you for the encouragement. Thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for teaching me how I could do this. Thank you for teaching me the technical details, but also thank you for teaching me how to, from what perspective to look at this. Thank you for teaching me about how you experienced the building of your business. Thank you for helping me understand the right expectations about how quickly this will grow. Because it really helped me to kind of be patient. And, I love that. And so when I sit there this afternoon and I'm thinking, why do I do what I do? Why do I do what I do? And the reason is because it's having a positive influence in people's lives. And so when I look at it, I don't know that I could say that I enjoy doing one more than the other. And I will say from time to time, there are times when I have more, I do get a greater sense of enjoyment out of working with clients one-on-one versus, teaching in a group. But there are times when teaching as a group together is so much more fun and enjoyable at times. It depends on what day of the week it is and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, this is awesome. I'm loving this. And there are some times when, all I want to do is spend the entire day recording podcast episodes. There are some days when I don't want to record a single podcast episode. I don't even want to look at a microphone right now. That kind of stuff kind of comes and goes and ebbs and flows. But the truth is why do I do what I do? I do the consulting. I do the one-on-one. I do the group training courses. I do these tutorials because I genuinely believe that I am helping people find their inner voice. I'm helping people find an inner passion. I'm helping people find a way of taking a message that they have been given to give to the world, and I'm helping them give that that message a voice. I'm teaching them how to effectively use some technology to get them out there in a way that's never been available before podcasting, and in a way that is very useful and has major impact in people's lives. I do what I do. I do what I do with podcast consulting, coaching, teaching, training. I do this because I help other people experience the joy and the fulfillment of what I have received myself from producing my own shows. I get to spread the joy, the passion, the overwhelming honor that it is to be able to accomplish the things that I have done through podcasting. I want to see other people achieve some of this stuff. I want to see other people benefit from these things, not just financially, but very much emotionally, spiritually, and just in so much in just joy and fulfillment, knowing that in the same way that I've had the ability to have a positive impact, a positive influence, to literally have the ability to help provide content that can change someone's life. I have experienced that, and I want others to experience that joy. That's why I can't see myself ever not sharing that joy, not sharing the information. I have the knowledge to teach people how to find the ability to achieve the joy of sharing their message with the world and making a positive difference in people's lives. So I when I think about it, I can't imagine not teaching. I can't imagine not doing one-on-one consulting calls. I can't imagine some of those things. It's what I feel led to do. And when I think about the fact of, do I ever want to get to a place where, I only have to work 4 hours, the 4-hour work week? No. Would it be nice to have that option? Sure. Because there are some weeks I don't want to even work 4 hours. It's just the truth. But those days are few and far between, especially when I remember, why do I do what I do? Why do I do what I do? And that's why I do that. So why do I do the other stuff? Why do I produce all this content? Well, because I am making a positive change in people's lives. Now, one of the things that I have in my Gmail account is these things called labels. And I have a label called Praise and Encouragement. And I get emails on a pretty consistent basis that say, hey, Cliff, I listened to episode such and such of the such and such podcast. Just fill in the blanks there. And I have to tell you, I am so inspired or encouraged by what you shared. I am so challenged by what you shared. I am so conflicted about what you shared because of this. Man, I cannot believe it's almost as if you were, reading my mind and wow. I just want to tell you that because of that episode, I've decided to do fill in the blank. And I'll just give you some examples of this. And I'm going to give you two pretty big examples, but man, there's actually been even bigger ones. I won't give you any details, but I have a letter that's on my board from somebody who said that I can share this. I have an email that's pinned to my board. I have a board with hundreds of postcards and letters and stuff from people from all over the world. And this one's on the board, and it's kind of stuck behind there, so it doesn't get out until the public and people just walk in and start reading these letters. But there's a letter on the board of a particular person who was contemplating suicide. And after listening to a particular podcast with my wife and I over a couple times and hearing us laugh and sharing some things about our story and talking about our family and talking about our kids, this person says, how could I have even considered leaving my family behind? And literally it was, the letter clearly states that had this person not found our podcast, had this person not subscribe to and listen to the podcast episodes that they did that weekend, that this person would have taken their life. And our podcast changed that. And this person is a very valuable member of our community. Oh man, I just tell you, it gives me chills thinking about it. But here's the other one. Let me give you another one. gspn.tv/debt-free. This will be in the show notes as well. gspn.tv/debt-free. This episode was episode 56 of a show called My Crazy Life, which is today called Pursuing a Balanced Life. All right. Episode 56 was titled Living Debt Free. And this was back in January of 2007. And Stephanie and I believe at the time we were not yet completely debt-free. In fact, it says here, let me read to you the very short show notes. It says, in this episode, Stephanie and I were very real and honest about our personal finances. If you have never thought that you could live debt-free, then this podcast episode is a must listen. This could be your first step in breaking free from being a slave to the lender. All right. And so in that episode, Stephanie and I were very, very authentic and transparent about our personal finances, about the mistakes that we had made, about the stupid things that we had done, and just how ridiculously ill-equipped we were to handle personal finances. And we talked about how we found out about Dave Ramsey, about going to a live event, and then all of a sudden just having a major paradigm shift in the way we think about finances, and how over a course of just a few years, we went from being tens of thousands of dollars in debt to where at the time we were almost completely debt-free minus our mortgage, which by the way, not too long after that, we became 100% debt-free minus our mortgage. Our mortgage is the only debt that my wife and I have at this point in time. But we shared how listening to Dave Ramsey and going to his live event, how that had a personal and profound impact in our lives. And Dave Ramsey's radio show, and he also has a podcast. Anyway, Dave's show, he has people call in when they're debt-free and they scream, "We're debt-free!" But guess what? Over the years, since January 2007, we have people who either call us first or they'll write us an email before they call in to talk to Dave on Dave's radio show, because they felt like that it was they had a responsibility. They felt this way. Not that I put this on them, but they said, I feel like I should call you guys first, because we would have never become debt-free. We would have never learned about Dave Ramsey. We would have never done his Financial Peace University. We would have never gone to his live event had you guys not talked about it, had you not shared so openly about your finances and the bad mistakes that you guys had made, because you know what? We realized you were just like us. It's almost as if you were just talking about us and just using your names as a cover-up to protect us. And wow, because of your podcast and because of Dave Ramsey's plan that you guys talked about so much, we're debt-free as well. We're debt-free. And I still today, this was in January of 2007. Today is October 2011. And I still get emails on a fairly consistent basis from people who are writing in to say, I finally did it, Cliff. I've been working at it ever since you guys talked about it on that one episode of My Crazy Life, and today I am debt-free. That, my friends, answers the question of why do I do what I do. You want one more? I've got hundreds of these, and but I'll just give you one. PABL Contagious. PABL Contagious, gspn.tv/PABL Contagious. This will be linked in the show notes as well. Anyway, this is just a very short blog post, and it's just a before and after picture of myself and my wife with one of our podcast listeners. And basically, I had been listening to Dr. Monty, and Dr. Monty had this show called fitnessrocks.org. That show had been such a profound influence in my life. I remember hearing about diet, health, fitness, nutrition, and it was radically changing my life. and I was dropping pounds like crazy, sharing what I learned with my wife in a podcast. My wife drastically seeing changes. And get this, so were hundreds of people listening to our podcast. I know of at least 100 people that I could link to, that I could have them give you personal testimony of where they've lost between 50 to 150 pounds as a result of listening to our podcast and being inspired by it. See, I believe that we have the possibility to change people's lives and to make a positive difference in people's lives with what we know, with what we're passionate about. And you don't have to know everything. You know, I'll give you another example. virtualassistantpodcast.com. And in fact, I don't have that one written into my show notes because I didn't do this in, what was it? Take number 2, I said. Link VA. There, it's in my show notes now. virtualassistantpodcast.com. I had no idea what a virtual assistant was or how it all worked and all this other stuff. But man, I ended up hiring a virtual assistant, and I became so passionate about virtual assistants that I'm like, wow, this has radically changed my life. I recorded 38 episodes about how my experience, chronicling my journey of having a virtual assistant. And you know what? Literally thousands upon thousands of people have subscribed to that podcast. And I simply shared what I was learning as I was learning it. How do I delegate? I'm teaching you as I go. You know what? I made a huge faux pas here. Don't ever do this. Hey, you know what? I found a new tool that's helping me to do this better and to delegate this more effectively. Let me tell you about this technology tool over here that I'm using to communicate with my assistant. Definitely was helping people change their lives, improving their business. I have people who have sent me emails telling me about how much my podcast has done to benefit their business, that they are so much more productive or they're spending more time with family, all of those things. And what is it that got me to record this episode today? Why am I recording this episode? I'm going to go through these really fast because, I'm approaching an hour here. And I want to tell you that once again, podcasting is changing my life. It has changed my life. And if you're a little bit queasy about somebody talking about their faith in God, then you may want to tune out because and just tune in with episode 231 because I'm going to talk to you for just a minute or two about what's been going on in my life. A couple weeks ago, I told you that I burned out. I did. I overdid it. Completely burned out. And, I just barely was able to get out there and do my daily intentional physical activity. And occasionally when I got out there and started doing my physical activity, I was listening to a podcast called A Renegade's Guide to God. You can find this at gspn.tv/renegade. All right. That'll take you to the iTunes page where you can actually subscribe to this podcast if you want. It's from my good friend and pastor, David H. Foster down in Tennessee. I met him on the No More Mondays cruise with Dan Miller. Super great guy. Love him and his wife and have become pretty good friends with David. And he's got, looks like there's 25, actually there's a total of 43 episodes out there, but it looks like only 25 are available online right now. But anyway, still, I started listening to his podcast, and honestly, I had pretty much kind of got out of my routine of spending time alone with God, and it's probably getting to the point where I almost was fed up with church. I just bored silly from church. It just was not. I just felt guilty about how horrible I was because I just didn't feel any. I didn't feel anything when I went to church. It's just like, other than bitterness for having to be there, and it's like, I'm going because, well, that's what good Christians do and stuff like that. And all this other stuff. And I just, I got so bogged down with work, and I'm so busy working, trying to do this, trying to do that. And to be honest with you, my time alone with God just wasn't where it was. And what was weird is the first 5 months of 2011, the first 5 months of this year, I literally woke up every morning at 5 a.m. and I'm not making this up, and I'm not trying to make myself look like a saint, because to be honest with you, I messed it up all a lot before that, and I've messed it up a great deal since. But for 5 months, every morning I woke up at 5 a.m., sometimes 5:45, but most of the time 5 a.m. And every single day I started the day with 1 hour of reading the Bible. Yeah, I did that because I felt like I hate church so much, and I'm not doing anything there. I feel like I'm miserable as a Christian, and so I should at least do something. And God, maybe if I start reading your Bible every day, I'm going to, rekindle that joy and passion I used to have for going to church on Sundays and worshiping you there. And so, to be honest with you, it just wasn't happening, but I still did it every day, and at least I felt a little bit good about myself. And what happened was, it was right around May. I had a couple weeks before we were leaving on a big, long family vacation, and then all of a sudden, I had to work a whole lot to get things ready to be gone for about 12 days, and so I did. And when we left, I kind of got out of the routine of waking up in the morning, and when I got back, I never got back into the routine, and so much so that, well, pretty much anything, just all those spiritual quote unquote disciplines, if you will, kind of just went out the window. And so did some of my other disciplines, like walking and intentional physical activity and eating healthy and all of these other things. Some of that stuff just got thrown out, and I started to feel really guilty and ashamed of myself. And I would do some things here and there and stuff, but I was listening to the Renegade Guide to God. Whenever I would go out for a walk, I would listen to the Renegade's Guide to God. And in this podcast, David Foster started talking about some things about God's love for me, and I started to think, wow, I would love it if what he was saying was true, but it's, I've been here, I've been around the block. And he started to say things, and literally, and this is not a sermon podcast, by the way. This is him kind of like me getting behind a microphone and just talking to you. It's what a Renegade's Guide to God is. And so he has a sermon podcast, but this one is based upon a book that he did, and the principles there. And I tell you, I really felt connected to David through this podcast, and it was having a positive change, at least in my mind, how I was thinking again about this spiritual aspect of my life, because to be honest with you, I just felt miserable. And so I wrote David an email. Actually, I sent him some audio feedback, and it was very genuine. You guys know me. I don't hold anything back. And I shared with him. I said, listen, David, I hear what you're saying. This whole idea that God loves me, he's not angry with me. But man, I tell you what, I've got some things here that are on my mind, and I just have this question for me. You talk about this, relationship with Jesus, and I felt like I've had that before, but you talk about the fact that sometimes it's a relationship with an institution, or a relationship with information, or a moral code of contact. And honestly, that's what my faith has all become about following rules, guidelines, religion, and doing the right things and stuff like that. And I've lost that personal relationship aspect, and I haven't had it in years. And I told him, I said, I'm getting, he says, gosh, Cliff, I listen to your podcast, and I'm blessed by what you do. And I'm always encouraged and inspired by the different decisions you make in going into podcasting, and how you talk with people, and how you're building community. I mean, you inspire me. And I'm like, you know what? I hear that, and I get these emails. I got an email the other day who somebody said, you know what, Cliff, I listened to your podcast, and I love how you incorporate your faith without blowing people over the head with it. It's not like you have to do this. And in fact, it's been 230 episodes of Podcast Answer Man, and I think this is the most I've ever talked about faith. And I don't plan on making this a habit. So I've got other podcasts for that. But anyway, somebody wrote me an email saying, "Gosh, you're the perfect example of what a Christian should be like." And I'm like, David, how can people say that? I mean, they have no idea that I'm not reading my Bible anymore. They have no idea that I'm not spending time praying. They have no idea that I'm they have no idea that when I go to church that I don't even stand up when they're standing up to sing the songs at church, and they don't know the fact that I hate the songs that they sing. They don't know the fact that I hate how they don't know how much I despise going to sitting in that building every Sunday morning. My heart seems so cold and everything. And he says, and I said, but the thing is there are times when, when I'm doing what I do behind the microphone, I feel like God's speaking, I feel like I'm doing what I'm doing because that's what God's calling me to do. And so I'm just kind of confused, and sometimes I get people at church who are, that wonder why I don't volunteer for this and why I turn down requests to participate in this program or that program. And I tell them I just don't have time for it because of how busy my life is. And I said, and I feel guilty. And so, so I wrote all these different things, and he says, Cliff, I want to know, can I take your questions and do podcasts about them for Renegade's Guide to God? And he did too. All right. And if you want, you can listen to them. The first one can be found at gspn.tv/renegade business. All right. gspn.tv/renegade business. And Renegade, by the way, I don't even know if I have that spelled right. Yeah, I do. Renegade. Okay. RENEGADE. So Renegade Business, linked in the podcast show notes. Anyway, it's called Can a For-Profit Business Be a Valid Christian Ministry? And so here is where my question was specifically answered in a podcast. And I'm telling you, this had a profound impact on me. The very next week, he recorded another one, and the title of the podcast is not necessarily the question that I asked, but it's certainly directed towards my question as well. And his is, how do you go about getting God to bless your business? All right, and so what happened was I said, I spent the first 5 months of this year, and I did so many different things, and I felt for sure that I seek God first. Seek first the kingdom of God and do the things that God tells you, and trust in me to provide for your every need. And so I think that's Matthew 6:33 or somewhere right around there. Anyway, I said, I understand the first 5 months, man, I was seeking God first, but and the blessings were coming, and the provision was amazing. This has been an amazing year. God's really blessed my business. But since May, I have dropped the ball on all of that stuff, and I feel guilty and ashamed, but yet I'm looking, and for some reason, God's not turned off the blessings. And I'm like, this just doesn't, and it goes with some of the things that you're saying, that God still loves me and stuff like this. And I'm listening to your podcast, and to be honest with you, this is different than what I always thought. I thought that God would be angry with me. God's upset with me, and he's going to withhold everything from me. He's going to hit me over the head with the 2x4. And sometimes I still think he will. But things are changing. But here's the thing. He did another podcast called, how do you go about getting God to bless your business? And that's at gspn.tv/renegade bless. All right, gspn.tv/renegade bless. All right, so that is out there, and he answered that, and that, my friends, all of a sudden I'm starting to understand a lot of different things about my relationship with God, and seeing things from a perspective that I've not seen before. Much in the same way that when I went to Dave Ramsey's live event, I started to think about finances differently. A lot like when I listened to Dr. Monte talk about Fitness Rocks, I started to see fitness and nutrition from a whole new light. Like when I listened to the Nutrition Diva, and I started to see things from a whole different way about eating healthy. When I started listening to Dan Miller and the way he talked about work and knowing thyself and finding the work that you love and finding your true passion and following that passion to find the work that will fulfill you, that you can actually succeed and excel and find excellence in. Much in the same way that those things had impacted me, this podcast had impacted me as well. And it led me to some other things. I started reading a book by Francine Rivers called, what was it called? It's called Redeeming Love. I'll just go ahead and put a link to that in the show notes as well. But it has nothing to do with podcasting. But then a friend of mine, we were talking about this book, and then she told me about another book, and that is called So You Don't Want to Go to Church Anymore. All right. So you don't want to go to... Okay, I'm just putting that into the show notes. So that led me to reading another book, So You Don't Want to Go to Church Anymore. That book radically has changed my mind about so many things, because it's not just that book, but it's just so much that's been going on in my life. And then all of a sudden, a friend of mine tells me about another podcast, and it's called, let's see here, what is it called? It is called Scandalous Freedom. And by the way, you can find this at gspn.tv/freedom podcast, all this linked to in the show notes. But anyways, Steve Brown's Scandalous Freedom podcast, and this is something that my friend and prayer partner, Robert Johnson, who's been my prayer partner for 15 years now, he told me about this. He goes, Cliff, everything you're saying, man, I tell you what, I know exactly what you're saying, because that's where I am as well. And that's the journey. This is very similar to the journey that I'm on. And then all of a sudden he's like, hey, you should listen to this, check out this podcast. So I listened to the Steve Brown podcast, and there's like 20 some odd episodes. I listened to like 12 hours of this podcast within just a couple short days, like within 5 days of starting it. Listened to every episode, having a tremendous impact on my life. And then all of a sudden I start getting back into recording my About the Church podcast, which is, when it came, it's like, that's where my focus, my priority has been, is recording that. And if you want to hear the very first podcast I recorded after that, it's gspn.tv/ATC121. That's About the Church, episode 121. So gspn.tv/ATC121. The title of that episode is titled Not Going to Church Anymore. As you can imagine, that had that rose a lot of attention. It gained a lot of attention. Then I recorded episodes 162 through 164 of almostdailydevotional.com, which, by the way, you can find at almostdailydevotional.com. And then all of a sudden I started to, the book, So You Don't Want to Go to Church Anymore, is from Wayne Jacobson. And I started to listen to his podcast called The God Journey. And you can find that at gspn.tv/God Journey Podcast. I've almost listened to every single episode of that. And let me tell you, there's a lot of hours of that. And then I'm also listening to every episode currently. I think I still have another 20 or 30 episodes to go of the Lifestream blog and podcast. And it is at gspn.tv/Lifestream podcast. That's LIFE stream podcast. So gspn.tv/Lifestream podcast. Anyway, basically, why do I share all of this? Because here's the situation. If you were to go right now and listen, and let me go ahead and start playing this music because this show will never end otherwise. If you go and listen to the Almost Daily Devotional, go to almostdailydevotional.com. Listen to the 3 episodes that are the most recent ones, 162, 163, 164. Listen to those podcasts. Hear the joy, hear the freedom, hear the stress-free living that I have going on right now. I tell you, I am so excited about where I am in my life right now. I have so much clarity, so much focus, and a pretty great relationship with God that has overflowed me with so much love that I have a desire to read His Word, a desire to spend time with Him, and not a I need to do it, a desire to do it. And I guess I'm sharing all of this stuff not to be all spiritual and try to win people over to my way of thinking about Christianity. That's not what this is about. This is all about telling you, why do I do what I do? Dave Ramsey changed the way I think about finances. Because of Dave Ramsey and the content he produces, my family is living debt-free minus our mortgage. Our mortgage is the only debt we have, and we used to have more than $80,000 in unsecured credit card debt. We don't have that anymore because of the inspiration and encouragement and education that we got from a very entertaining Dave Ramsey. My business today, the fact that I'm actually have my own business today, a lot of it has to do with the fact of the content that Dan Miller put out that inspired me, encourages me, that educates me, and that is coming in a very entertaining fashion. Do you see the picture here? Dr. Monte, back when he did fitnessrocks.org, it was entertaining to listen to. He was a fun, energetic guy. He brought boring stuff and made it interesting to listen to, and he educated me, he encouraged me, and he inspired me. And today I'm physically a different person than I was before. David H. Foster, many other people, Wayne Jacobson, creating this content. Even today, in 2011, I started listening to podcasts in 2005. Even today, so many years later, podcasting, audio podcasting, is having a positive change in my life. My friends, that's why I do what I do.